All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into psychologist Sadia Khan's pretty controversial take on modern dating. She calls it a crisis, and here's the kicker. She argues it's one we've created ourselves. Let's get right into it.
Okay, so let's just dive right in with the quote that kinda set the internet on fire. This is the core of her argument, a really provocative claim. It's a bold statement for sure, so let's unpack exactly how she gets there.
So, her whole point is this: the mess we're in with modern dating, it's not some accident. It's not just something that's happening to us. Khan's thesis is that these problems are the direct result of a culture we've actively built and participated in.
So to really get a grip on what she's saying, we're going to break this down into 5 key parts. First, the self-inflicted crisis itself. Then we'll look at what she calls the roots of male loneliness. After that, her controversial link between feminism and narcissism, then the dynamics of infidelity, and finally, her radical redefinition of marriage as a skill.
All right, so first things first, let's talk about the environment we're all swimming in. Khan believes the entire digital landscape of dating is basically setting relationships up to fail before they even begin.
So Khan's point here is that you're not just competing with people in your town anymore. Nope, you're competing with an algorithm that's feeding you an endless, curated stream of perfect options. In her view, this has totally polluted our mindset and created these wild, unrealistic expectations for what a partner should be, making a real, healthy relationship almost impossible to find.
Okay, so where does all this trouble begin? Well, according to Khan, a huge piece of the puzzle is what's going on with modern men. She points directly to a growing epidemic of loneliness in passivity.
She sees this loneliness epidemic in men, for sure. But here's the twist. She thinks it's almost entirely self-inflicted. So let's take a look at the specific cycle of behavior that she says is causing all this. And this right here, this is the cycle she's talking about. It's a domino effect, right? It all starts with being bombarded by online content that gives you these quick, easy, short-term highs. That makes you less motivated to actually go out and interact in the real world. And over time, she argues, your social skills get rusty, your confidence takes a nosedive, and bam, you're stuck in this feedback loop of loneliness.
But it goes deeper than just social skills. She's making a point about character. She argues that this constant hunt for shortcuts, whether it's porn instead of real intimacy or get-rich-quick schemes instead of putting in the work, has eroded what she calls men's grit to suffer. They've gotten softer, less resilient, and, in her view, that ultimately makes them less attractive.
Okay, so that's one side of the coin. Now let's flip it over and look at the other half of her diagnosis. And, this is where things get really controversial, because she focuses on modern women and what she sees as the influence of feminism.
Yeah, she really doesn't pull any punches here. She flat out says that women today are considerably more narcissistic. And what does she blame for this? Well, she points to 2 massive cultural forces that she believes are working together: modern feminism and the constant validation machine that is social media. And this is where she points out what she sees as a huge contradiction. On one hand, she says feminism has taught women you don't owe a man traditional things like respect or service. But on the other hand, the expectation for men to be the traditional provider, to pay for everything, be strong and masculine, that hasn't gone anywhere.
So you have this imbalance, this paradox she's talking about, and in her view, it leads straight to some pretty disastrous results in relationships, especially when we start talking about infidelity. So of course, she gets asked the big question: who cheats more, men or women? And her answer? Well, it definitely goes against what a lot of people think.
Yeah, her answer is about as blunt as it gets. She says women, they're just better at it. Now, she thinks the rates are probably about equal, but she claims women are simply more effective cheaters. Let's look at why.
So she breaks it down like this. She sees men as being, well, sloppier about it, more likely to get caught, maybe feeling some guilt afterwards. But women, she claims they're more calculated, much better at hiding it, and, this is the key part, they often feel zero guilt once they've emotionally checked out of the relationship.
And all this leads her to a pretty jaw-dropping statistic. She estimates that in England, a whopping 70% of couples have a situation where at least one partner has done something that the other person would see as being unfaithful. 70%.
So, okay, if the dating pool is this polluted and infidelity is this common, what does that mean for marriage? Well, Khan argues our whole modern idea of marriage is basically broken because it's built on a romantic fantasy instead of, reality.
And this is really her big takeaway when it comes to long-term commitment. For her, marriage isn't some magical fantasy where you find the one and live happily ever after. No. It's a skill. It's something you have to learn and practice. The person you're with is actually less important than the skills you develop together.
So what are these skills she's talking about? Well, get ready, because they pretty much go against everything modern culture tells us. She's talking about accepting monotony, not constantly seeking novelty and excitement, and actually practicing dependency on someone else, not being fiercely, overly independent.
And here's the catch, right? The older we get, the more time we spend single, the better we get at the exact opposite skills. We become masters of independence, we get used to constant novelty. So in her view, we're literally training ourselves out of the skills we need for a marriage to actually last.
And this quote right here, this really gets to the heart of her entire philosophy. It's a direct shot at how we're taught to live our lives today. This modern obsession with putting our feelings and our happiness first, above all else.
Let me boil it down for you. Khan believes we have it completely backwards. We're all out here chasing the feeling of happiness, but she argues that a successful life, a life of achievement, of doing hard things, that's what actually creates a happy life as a byproduct.
So, that leaves us with this final thought, this one big question that really wraps up her entire argument. It kind of forces you to ask yourself, is a happy life the goal we should be aiming for directly? Or is it just the reward we get for living a good, successful life? It's a powerful question to end on.